Good evening aspirants, welcome to the Hindu newspaper analysis discussion by Shankar IAS Academy. Yesterday, due to a technical difficulty, we were not able to publish the newspaper analysis discussion. So instead, we have added articles from yesterday's newspaper and today's newspaper in today's newspaper discussion. So these are the articles we are going to discuss today. The articles are displayed above. Let us move into today's discussion. Let us start our discussion today by going through some map-based question. I have taken some important places that appeared in the newspaper. I have attached the articles, the date in which it appeared, the page number and the edition before every question. Although the article won't be important for our exams, UPSC might pick up these places and ask a question in prelims. We can expect 3 or 4 map-based questions every year. The issue with map-based question is you either know the answer or you don't. It is difficult to make informed guess in map-based question. So, when a new place appears in the newspaper, take the atlas and locate it. Have a bird's eye view and look at the area around it also. It will be helpful. It will help you fetch the crucial 2-3 marks that will help you clear the prelims examination. Now let us move on to the first question. The first question is based on this article. Now moving on to the question. The question is regarding Mount Kilimanjaro, which is located in Tanzania. 4 statements are given. We have to find which of the following statement is correct. The first statement. Mount Kilimanjaro is the tallest freestanding mountain in the world. The statement is correct. Mount Kilimanjaro is indeed the tallest freestanding mountain in the world. At the tallest point, it reaches the height of 5,895 meters. See here the key word is freestanding mountain. Actually, a freestanding mountain is a mountain that stands alone and is not part of any mountain system. From this image, you can get an idea what a freestanding mountain is. So in the statement, if it is given like Mount Kilimanjaro is the tallest mountain in the world, then the statement would be wrong. Since we know Mount Everest is the tallest mountain in the world. Mount Everest is not a freestanding mountain since it is part of the Himalayan range. Second statement. It is a stratovolcano. This statement is also true. It is indeed a stratovolcano. Let me give you some points about stratovolcanoes. They are conical, tall volcanoes that are formed by highly acidic, very viscous lava. These lava are called andesitic lava. See this image. Since the lava is highly viscous, they do not flow for a long distance, thus forming a characteristic conical volcano. Other examples of stratovolcano are Mount Stromboli, Mount Vesuvius and Mount Fuji. Now aspirants, after today's discussion, take your atlas and try to locate the above mentioned volcanoes. Now the third statement. Kilimanjaro has 3 volcanic cones, namely Kibo, Mawenzi and Shira, and all volcanic cones are dormant. The first part of the statement is correct. Kibo, Mawenzi and Shira are the volcanic cones in Kilimanjaro. In fact, Kibo is the highest point in Mount Kilimanjaro, but only Mawenzi and Shira are extinct. Kibo is actually dormant. The most recent activity happened in Kibo some 200 years ago. The last statement is that rivers Lumi and Pangani drain Kilimanjaro on the western and southern sides respectively. The statement is false since rivers Lumi and Pangani flows on the wetter eastern side of Kilimanjaro. This is because eastern side of Kilimanjaro faces the sea. Hence it is in the windward side and it is significantly wetter than the leeward western side. Hence perennial rivers like Lumi and Pangani flows in the eastern side of Kilimanjaro. So the correct answer is option A, 1 and 2 only. Now moving on to the next question. This question is based on this article. The question asks for the following given countries, which countries has both Mediterranean and Atlantic coasts. The countries given are Morocco, Portugal, Algeria and Spain. Now let us take the map. See, Spain here has both Atlantic and Mediterranean coast. Likewise, Morocco has both Atlantic and Mediterranean coast. Algeria has only Mediterranean coast and finally Portugal has only Atlantic coast. So the correct answer here is option D, 1 and 4 only. Now if you get a question like this in our discussion session or you get a question like this in one of your mock test, you must not leave it at that. You must take the atlas and look at the places again. In this case, you can look for other countries that has both Atlantic and Mediterranean coast. Only by doing this, you can widen your knowledge. Now moving on to the next question. This question is based on this article. It appeared on the Hindu on 24th August. The question has given us 4 water bodies and asked us to arrange them from south to north. The given water bodies are Lake Quoran, Gulf of Aqaba, Sea of Galilee and Dead Sea. Since the Middle East is always in the news, you must have the map of this region in your fingertips. So now let us take these water bodies one by one. First is Lake Quoran. Lake Quoran is a artificial lake in Lebanon. It is built across the river Litani, which is the longest river in Lebanon. Now moving on to Gulf of Aqaba. We all know what is a gulf, right? A gulf is a part of the sea that is almost surrounded by land. Now look at this image. The Gulf of Aqaba is almost surrounded by land. It is located on the northern tip of Red Sea. East of it is Arabian Peninsula and west of it is Sinai Peninsula. Here is the Sinai Peninsula. It is part of Egypt. An interesting fact about Sinai Peninsula is it is a part of Asian continent. So Egypt has territories in both African and Asian continent. Now coming back to Gulf of Aqaba. Its coastline is divided by 4 countries which include Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia and Egypt. Now let us look at Sea of Galilee. Look at this map. Here is Israel. Sea of Galilee is also called Lake Tiberias. It is located on the northern part of Israel. This is a freshwater lake and it is the lowest freshwater lake in the world, meaning the lake is located at levels between 215 meters and 209 meters below sea level. The lake is actually located in the Jordan Rift Valley. The Jordan Rift Valley is formed due to the separation of African plate from the Arabian plate. The lake is mainly fed by Jordan River and some underground springs. So recapping this segment, the lake is actually located in Israel in the Jordan Rift Valley and is mainly fed by Jordan River. Now moving on to Dead Sea. Here is the Dead Sea. It is located south of Sea of Galilee. It is a saltwater lake bordered by Jordan to the east and Israel to the west. The lake's surface is 430 meters below mean sea level, making it the lowest lake in the world. Note here, Sea of Galilee is the lowest freshwater lake and Dead Sea is the lowest lake. Since the water is highly saline, the density of the water is very high. Thus, people cannot easily drown in Dead Sea. This lake is also located in the Jordan Rift Valley. Dead Sea, though it has high salinity, it is not the saltiest water body in the world. Interestingly, the saltiest water body, Don Juan Pond, is located in Antarctica. Apparently, the salinity here is so high that even at temperatures as low as minus 30 degrees Celsius, the water never freezes. Now coming back to the question. From this discussion, we know Gulf Aqaba is the southernmost. Then comes Dead Sea, then Sea of Galilee, finally in the north, Lake Quoran. So the answer here is option C, 2431. I hope this segment was helpful and gave you a little idea for how to prepare for map-based questions. So now let us wind up this and take up the first article for our discussion. Let us start today's discussion with this article. Through this article here, the author takes a critical look at the eShram portal that the government recently launched. We already discussed about the objectives, eligibility criteria for eShram portal on our 8th September Hindu newspaper discussion session. Articles like this are important with the evolving nature of UPSC mains examination. Since for the past couple of years, mains questions are focusing on the analysis part rather than the description part. So reading article like this will help you look at every government measure analytically. Having this in mind, let us start the discussion. The syllabus covered by this article is highlighted below for your reference. Now quickly refreshing, eShram portal has been developed for creating a national database of unorganized workers, which will also be Aadhaar seeded. It comes under Ministry of Labour. Author through this article has highlighted the issues with this portal. Let us go over it one by one. First is the long drawn nature of the registration process itself. We have 380 million unorganized workers. Even though the portal was launched on August 26, till now only 0.6 million have been registered. So it is going to take a lot of time before we have a database of the entire informal sector. second issue is this. Although the government has made it mandatory, the small employers like our local kirana shop owner who mainly employ informal labor have no gain for them by nudging their workers to register. So the unorganized worker may not voluntarily come forward and register because the gains are not immediate. The long-term gains may not be visible to both the employer and the unorganized worker. Third is the question of data security. See, the government is collecting huge quantum of data. The data security infrastructure with the center for keeping such quantity is still questionable. Further, these data is going to be shared with the state governments. Some state governments don't have the infrastructure to safely house and handle huge volumes of data. With the data protection bill still in limbo, there is no concrete data protection measure in our country. Next is the question of exclusion. According to the Social Security Code, workers covered under the Employee Provident Fund and the Employee State Insurance are excluded from this portal. This complicates the problem. See, people working in hazardous settings are compulsorily included in the ESI framework. So due to this, people who are working in hazardous environment are excluded from the portal. Apart from this, even people aged above 59 are excluded from the portal. So this may amount to age-based discrimination as well. Next, the author has talked about the issue of Aadhaar seeding. We saw that eShram portal is Aadhaar seeded. The issue is that not many will have a Aadhaar seeded mobile phone because in India still smartphone penetration is very low. It is a socio-economic issue here. Further, Aadhaar seeding is itself a political issue because Aadhaar doesn't mean citizenship itself, especially in Northeast and all. So this could be controversial. Next, author deals with the issue of changing identity of the informal workers. If you see, many are migrant workers. Their place of residence hence will be continuously changing. The moment he or she migrates, the authenticity of the data attached to that person vanishes. So to maintain a mechanical database can soon become redundant. Lastly, he talks about the procedural difficulties. See, center has laid out the plan, but states have to implement it. So take Maharashtra for example. In Maharashtra, the server was down for a few days. An informal worker who has approached the center when the server is down will not be motivated to go do the procedure again, thus leaving him out of the portal. So a lot depends on the initiatives and the promptness of the state governments. Also, there is a risk of corruption among the middlemen. For example, internet centers which act as middlemen might charge exorbitant charges to the unorganized workers to register and print eShram cards. This will in turn discourage the workers from registering in the portal. So to recap, here in this discussion we saw some issues surrounding eShram portal like long drawn registration process, no incentive for small employer to get his or her employees registered, issue of exclusion, issue of Aadhaar seeding, data security issues, changing identity of migrant labor and corruption by the middlemen. Government should swiftly overcome these challenges to implement this to the fullest potential, since eShram would give the now invisible informal workers the much needed visibility. It will act as a labor market citizenship document to the unorganized sector workers. So with this, let's conclude this discussion, and now let us take up the next article for our discussion. Now let us take up this editorial for our discussion. The editorial mentions about a trilateral security partnership for the Indo-Pacific region. The partnership is between Australia, the United Kingdom and the United States of America. Thus the name AUKUS. There are two important significance for this trilateral alliance. Let's see it one by one. First is, it complements the already existing Indo-Pacific cooperations like the Quad and the Five Eyes intelligence. Since we have discussed a lot about Quad, we will see what is Five Eyes intelligence cooperation. This is a intelligence sharing agreement between English speaking countries like US, UK, Canada, New Zealand and Australia. This was formed during the Cold War era to counter the influence of Soviet Union and its allies. Now let us take up the second significance of this trilateral alliance. The second important significance of the alliance is that the US has agreed to share the technology of nuclear powered submarines with Australia and help Australia build a fleet of nuclear powered submarines. This is a significant move by the US since it has shared the technology of nuclear powered submarines only once, that too with the United Kingdom in 1958. This move will improve Australia's undersea and anti-submarine capabilities in the Indo-Pacific region. Since Australia is also a part of Quad, this will improve Quad's ability to ensure peace in the Indo-Pacific region. As the famous Roman saying goes, if you want peace, you must be prepared for war. So measures like this will act as a counter for China and its influence in the Indo-Pacific region, thus helping ensure freedom of navigation, rule-based order and peace in the region. In this discussion, we looked into what a UK-US trilateral security partnership is, the significance of this alliance, and the significance of this alliance for the peace and security in the Indo-Pacific region. We also saw a little bit about Five Eyes intelligence cooperation. With this, let us wind up this discussion and move on to the next article. Now, let us take this editorial. The content in this editorial is regarding inflation. This article is nothing but a monthly update on inflation. So, it won't be beneficial in the long run, since the data would be outdated by the time we appear for our exams. But we have to focus here on terms like CPI and WPI, which are mentioned in the editorial. They are very important for our exams. So let us see about them first, then we will discuss about some points mentioned in the editorial. The syllabus regarding this article is given here for your reference. First, let us take WPI, or the Wholesale Price Index. The WPI measures the average change in the prices of commodities which are at an early distribution stage, that is, which is before the retail level of sale. We know that in India, WPI is officially published by the Office of Economic Advisor, which is under Ministry of Commerce and Industry. This index is published on a monthly basis. The WPI is calculated using the base year 2011-12. Now let us see why this index is not widely used for policy making. This is because of two factors. The first is that WPI does not cover services, and the second is that the general public, that is common people like us, we do not purchase commodities at wholesale prices. We purchase our goods at retail price. So WPI is not widely used for policy framing. Now moving on to Consumer Price Index, or CPI. The CPI measures the increase in price experienced at retail shops. So we can define CPI as a measure of change in retail prices of goods and services consumed by a defined population group in a given area with reference to a base year. Note here that CPI includes services also. Hence, this gives the actual reflection of the price rise in the country. The base year for calculating CPI in our country is 2012. Within CPI, we have three types, because different segment of our population have different choices of consumption and purchasing power. Thus, a single CPI won't be able to have a holistic picture. Now let us understand some of the important CPIs, that is consumer price indexes. First is CPI for industrial workers. This measures the extent of change in the retail price of goods and services consumed by industrial workers. Second is the CPI for agricultural workers. This measures the extent of change in the retail prices of goods and services consumed by the agricultural laborers. Third is the CPI for rural labor. This measures the extent of change in retail prices of goods and services consumed by rural laborers. Note here that these three indices are compiled by the Labour Bureau in the Ministry of Labour and employment. If we look closely, we can see that the above mentioned CPI indices represent only a specific segment of our population, and they do not reflect the true picture of price change in the country as a whole. So, National Statistical Office NSO of Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation has started releasing a new series of CPI with 2012 as the base year. The new series includes 3 CPIs. The first is CPI for the entire urban population, that is CPI urban. The second is CPI for the entire rural population, that is CPI rural. And the next is CPI combined, which is the combination of CPI urban and CPI rural. Note here that RBI is using CPI combined as the sole inflation measure for setting inflation targets and ensuring price stabilities. An important point here is that CPI rural, CPI urban and CPI combined were released by CSO, that is the Central Statistical Office. But as of 23rd May 2019, the Office of National Sample Survey Office, that is NSSO, merged with the Central Statistical Office or CSO to form the National Statistical Office. So in the prelims, UPSC might ask who releases CPI and give both CSO and NSO in the option. The correct option would be National Statistical Office, not Central Statistical Office. Please note that. Now coming back to the editorial. The editorial mentions that the price pressures have begun to moderate in our economy. The CPI for August is at 5.3%. It is an improvement over July's CPI of 5.59%. This is a welcome improvement. However, a lot is still desired. For example, take the prices of meat, fish, dairy, oils and fats. They are still accelerating. Similarly, the prices of eggs, pulses and vegetables are also a cause for concern. In addition to that, the rising price of fuel is also affecting many sectors. We know that high fuel prices result in increased transportation cost. That is, this in turn affects many sectors. So according to this article, if we do not take proactive steps to control inflation, we may breach RBI's monetary policy upper threshold of 6%. This will severely affect our recovering economy. So, instead of going for short-term solutions, we must look for long-term options. In this discussion, we looked into important terms like wholesale price index and consumer price index. We saw why CPI is a better tool for measuring inflation, and we saw the organization that published the above mentioned indices. Now let us wind up this discussion and move on to the next article. Now let us take this article. This article made headlines yesterday, that is 16th of September. Before moving into the discussion, let us go back 7 or 8 years. Back then there used to be lot of telecom service providers. You guys remember Tata Docomo, MTS, Uninor, Aircel, Reliance, etc. But due to heavy competition, these companies started closing shop in India. Now although there are 4 service providers in the market, the reality is a duopoly by Jio and Airtel. This is a worrying situation both for us, the consumers and the government. So the government has announced certain measures to help the ailing telecom service providers. Now let us look into some important points mentioned in this article. The syllabus covered by this article is highlighted below for your reference. To help the telecom sector, the government has announced a total of 9 structural reforms and 5 procedural reforms. But in our discussion today, we are going to talk only about 2 of them, which are very important. First is the concept of adjusted gross revenue, shortly known as AGR. And second is the 100% FDI in telecom sector under automatic route. Now let's see both of them in detail. First, let's start by understanding what is AGR, that is adjusted gross revenue. In simple words, adjusted gross revenue is the usage and licensing fee that the telecom operators are charged by the Department of Telecommunication. And this charge is divided into 2. First being spectrum usage charges and the second being licensing fee. The spectrum usage charge is fixed at 3 to 5% and the licensing fee is fixed at 8%. And as per the Department of Telecommunication, these charges are calculated based on all the revenue earned by the telecom company. That is, it includes the revenue generated from both telecom related and non-telecom related sources such as deposit interest and asset sales. See, there was a contention going on between telecom operators and the government regarding the particulars considered to calculate the amount payable, because the telecom operators on their part insisted that the AGR should comprise only the revenue generated from the telecom services, and they were not okay with the non-telecom related sources being included in it. And this issue has been going on for a long time. At present, this issue is being resolved through this reform. That is, the reform has redefined the concept of adjusted gross revenue by excluding non-telecom revenue. So that means the revenue from non-telecom sources will no more be taken into account while calculating the AGR. And not just that, a 4-year moratorium has been placed over the telecom players' dues to the government. And also note that the interest on the AGR dues will now be compounded annually, because so far it has been done monthly. On that line, the interest rate on the dues would be charged at a reasonable rate of MCLR plus 2%. And we know MCLR, that is marginal cost of funds based lending rate, is nothing but the lowest lending rate banks are permitted to offer. Moving on to the next major measure, that is related to FDI. As per the new reforms, the foreign direct investment in the telecom sector has been allowed up to 100% under the automatic route, and this has been increased from the existing limit of 49%. See, the entry of foreign direct investment by non-residents into India is generally regulated through two routes. One is automatic route and the next is approval route. Under the automatic route, the foreign investor or the Indian company does not require any approval from the Reserve Bank or the Government of India for the investment. As per the government, these measures are carried out to ensure more players in the sector and also to provide the consumers with multiple choices. This will curb the duopolistic tendencies that is occurring in the telecom sector. These measures are also expected to pave way for large-scale investment and employment generation. In this discussion, we talked about the problems that the telecom sector is facing, what is adjusted gross revenue and the issues surrounding it, and the recent government reforms like redefining AGR and allowing 100% FDI in telecom sector through automatic route. And finally, we talked about how the government measures will stop the telecom sector from becoming duopolistic. With this, let us wind up this discussion and move on to the next article. Now, let us take up this news article. The article here reports about an exercise of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. As per the news article, an Indian team of 200 Army and Air Force personnel are in Russia to participate in the exercise, that is Exercise Peaceful Mission. And this exercise is being held between the member states of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And note that this is the 6th edition of multinational military exercise that is organized by the SCO in Russia's Oregon. So this is the basic crux of this news article. Now in this context, let's briefly see about the said exercise and also the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. See, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, shortly known as SCO, is a permanent international intergovernmental organization, and the creation of this organization was announced back in June 2001 at Shanghai. Currently, SCO comprises of 8 member states. They are China, India, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Pakistan, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. Of the 8 member states, the founding members were China, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. India and Pakistan, which were earlier observer states, joined the SCO as full members on 9th June 2017 at a summit in Astana. Astana is in Kazakhstan. Now the name has been changed to Nur Sultan, which is the capital of Kazakhstan. Apart from this, the SCO has got 4 observer states. They are Afghanistan, Belarus, Iran and Mongolia. And in addition to the 8 member states and 4 observer states, the SCO has got 6 dialogue partners. They are Armenia, Azerbaijan, Cambodia, Nepal, Sri Lanka and Turkey. Now let us look into the structure of SCO. The heads of the State Council or HSC is the supreme decision making body in the SCO, and this body meets once in a year, during which it adopts the decisions and guidelines on all important matters of the organization. Adding to this, the SCO's head of government council, which also meets once a year to discuss the various aspects of the organization and to approve the organization's annual budget. The SCO has got 2 permanent bodies. They are the SCO Secretariat and the Executive Committee of the Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure, that is RATS. The Secretariat is based in Beijing and the RATS is based in Tashkent. Tashkent is the capital of Uzbekistan. You guys know about the Tashkent Agreement, right? For people who are not aware of this, let me take a small detour and explain about it in a few words. The Tashkent Declaration was a peace agreement signed between India's Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri and Pakistan's President Ayub Khan to resolve the Indo-Pakistan War of 1965. This agreement basically tried to restore the economic and diplomatic relationships in the respective countries, and both countries promised to keep away from each other's internal and external affairs. They also promised to work towards the progress in bilateral relations. Now coming to the exercise Peaceful Mission, which is seen in today's news. See, the Joint Counter-Terrorism Exercise Peaceful Mission is a multilateral exercise. It is conducted biennially as a part of military diplomacy between the SCO member states. The scope of the exercise includes professional interaction, mutual understanding of drills and procedures, establishment of joint command, control structures, and elimination of terrorist threats. The aim of the exercise is to foster close relations between the SCO member states and also to enhance the ability of the military leaders to command multinational military contingents. And the exercise is expected to enable the sharing of best practices between the armed forces of the SCO nations. In this discussion, we talked about SCO, when it was founded, its members, its objectives, and a little bit about Tashkent Agreement of 1965. Finally, we looked into the multilateral exercise Peaceful Mission. Now let us wind up our discussion and move on to the next article. Now let us take up this news article for our next discussion. The article here basically talks about a person named V. Sai Subramaniam, who has become the first Morsing exponent to receive the Kalki Krishnamurti Award. Let us not go any further into that story since it is not very relevant for our exam. Instead, with this background, let us see important facts about Morsing, which is a melodic instrument seen on the Carnatic concert platforms. Know that the Morsing is a Carnatic percussion instrument. See, a percussion instrument refers to any instrument that makes a sound when it is hit, shaken or scraped. Generally, it is not very easy to be a percussionist or a person who plays such instrument because it takes a lot of practice to hit an instrument with the right amount of strength at the right place and that too at the right time. The origins of Morsing lie in the folk music, and often the Jewish harp is identified as a precursor to the Indian Morsing. And know that in the southern part of India, the Morsing is a classical percussion instrument, whereas in the northern part of India, especially in the regions of Rajasthan, it is a folk instrument. Note the difference here. Southern part it is a classical instrument and in northern India it is a folk instrument. Coming to its structure. As you can see in this picture here, it is a tiny instrument shaped like a prongs with an iron frame and an additional metal stick or a steel rod running through the length of the instrument. As we know, in Indian classical music, you usually tune your instrument or sing to the tone of the music that is being performed. Know that a different morsing is required for different tonal centers, and that means each individual instrument may still require tuning. For this reason, beeswax is traditionally applied on the tip of the steel rod to change the pitch very slightly. Actually, beeswax is nothing but a product made from honeycomb of the honeybee or other bees. Now let us see how it is played. See, usually this instrument is held in the left hand while playing. The morsing is played by holding the prongs against the upper and lower teeth with the metal stick protruding out and plugged with the index finger. And then the further control of the instrument is done by careful regulation of the player's breath. Movement of the player's tongue with constant plucking can produce very fast patterns of sound. By constricting the space in the mouth, the nostrils can produce sounds in different phases similar to the phaser in electronic music. Now let us see a little bit about Kalki Krishnamurthy Award. The award is presented by Kalki Krishnamurthy Memorial Trust for young and aspiring artists. Kalki Krishnamurthy was a writer based in Tamil Nadu. His notable works include historical novels like Ponniyin Selvan, Parthiban Kanavu and Sivagamiyin Sabadam. Director Maniratnam's next magnum opus is based on Kalki Krishnamurthy's Ponniyin Selvan. In this discussion, we talked about the instrument morsing, its origin, how it is played, and we saw a little bit about Kalki Krishnamurthy. With these facts in mind, let us wind up this discussion and move on to the next article. Now look at this news segment. The news mentions that after a brief disagreement with the Supreme Court, the government, as an one-off measure, decided to reinstate Justice A.I.C. Cheema as the acting chairperson of National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, that is NCLAT. In this context, let us revise about National Company Law Appellate Tribunal. National Company Law Appellate Tribunal was formed based on the recommendation of Justice Iradi Committee that was related to the insolvency and winding up of companies in India. It is a statutory body as it was constituted under Section 410 of the Companies Act 2013. On 28 September 2020, the Companies Amendment Bill 2020 received the assent of the President to become an act. The amendment made changes to increase the number of benches for National Company Law Appellate Tribunal in order to ease its burden and decrease its pendency. As of now, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs has 15 National Company Law Appellate Tribunal benches. Now let us see why National Company Law Appellate Tribunal was created. It was constituted with the purpose of hearing appeals from the orders of National Company Law Tribunal under the Companies Act. That is, it functions as an appellate tribunal. Appellate tribunal means a special court or a committee or a tribunal that is formed to reconsider a decision made by another court or a committee or a tribunal. It also functions as the appellate tribunal for hearing appeals against orders passed by National Company Law Tribunal under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016. Then it is also the appellate tribunal for hearing appeals against the orders passed by Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India under Section 202 and Section 211 of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Next is, it is also the appellate tribunal under Competition Act 2002. That is, as Section 410 Clause 2 of Companies Act and Section 53A of Competition Act 2002, it hears and disposes of the appeals against the directions, decisions and orders passed by the Competition Commission of India. But note that if any person is not satisfied with the orders of National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, they can appeal to the Supreme Court within 60 days from the date of receipt of the order of National Company Law Appellate Tribunal. Now coming to its composition. It consists of a chairperson and judicial and technical members having a tenure of 5 years. The chairpersons shall be a former or incumbent judge of Supreme Court or the Chief Justice of any High Court. The judicial member is a former or incumbent judge of High Court or is a judicial member of National Company Law Tribunal for 5 years. Then a technical member is also made as a part of National Company Law Appellate Tribunal. See, the technical member is a person having special knowledge in industrial finance, industrial management, industrial reconstruction, investment and accountancy. The technical member should have a professional experience of not less than 25 years. Here note that the chairperson and judicial members are appointed after consultation with the Chief Justice of India, whereas the technical members are appointed on the recommendation of a selection committee consisting of Chief Justice of India or her nominee, a senior judge of Supreme Court or Chief Justice of High Court, and secretaries to the Ministries of Corporate Affairs and Law and Justice. So let's conclude this discussion. In this discussion, we looked into the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, its origin, its role, its composition. We also saw the recent change made under Companies Amendment Act 2020 regarding National Company Law Appellate Tribunal. Having discussed this, let us conclude this discussion and move on to the next article. Now look at this article. ISRO apparently is working on a reusable launch vehicle for GSLV Mark III. In this part of the discussion, we will look into GSLV Mark III, what is a reusable vehicle, what is payload fraction. First, let us start with reusable launch vehicle. A reusable launch system or a reusable launch vehicle is a system capable of launching a payload into space more than once. This allows for the reuse of some or all of the components of the launch vehicle. Opposite to this is the expendable launch system, which can be used only once. As you may know, rocket components and assembling is an expensive affair. So, if we are able to reuse the components, it is a cost saving measure. So, all around the world, people went into the quest for it. In that direction, the first reusable vehicle was the Space Shuttle, launched in 1981. It launched like a rocket and returned to Earth like a glider, landing on an airplane on a long concrete runway. However, this wasn't cheap as expected. But in recent time, SpaceX has mastered this technology, and Falcon 9 is known for this. In Falcon 9, the first stage is reusable, the second stage is expendable or not reusable. As we saw already, launch costs will get cheaper with reusable vehicle. When the launch cost gets cheaper, the space travel will also get cheaper. See, nowadays, space is being looked at not just as a science quest, but as a extreme recreation activity. Recently, billionaires Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos made their space flight. Even day before yesterday, Elon Musk's SpaceX launched 4 private civilians in a Dragon capsule carried by their Falcon 9 rocket on a 3-day orbital flight around the Earth. The mission was aptly named Inspiration 4. On the other hand, with the fast depleting resources in Earth, asteroid mining is gaining traction. If India is able to master this reuse technology, we will also be in a position to mine resources from space. And of course, we will gain an edge in the space race. Besides, space could be the next new battleground in the future. So, this becomes an important leap that ISRO is trying to make. See, the article talks about human factor payload fraction. Let us quickly understand that as well. Look at the formula. The payload fraction is equal to the mass of payload divided by the mass of the propellant and the structure. Understand this. Payload is the camera, drones, telescope that you send to space for study purposes. But a rocket will also need fuel, that is propellant, and other support structures. And both payload and the others will have their own masses. The question is, which mass we are going to minimize? If we are able to send more payload, better will be the research. So we will want to cut the mass from propellants and other support structures. So always, scientists will strive to make a better payload ratio, that is a bigger numerator and a smaller denominator. Now human factor payload fraction comes into picture when we are trying to send humans to space. So the mass of the cosmonauts are taken into consideration along with the payload to assess the payload fraction or payload ratio. Now let us quickly look into GSLV Mark III, which is important for preliminary examination. See, the GSLV Mark III is expanded as Geosynchronous Satellite Launch Vehicle, Mark III. So far there has been 4 successful launches by GSLV Mark III. The famous Chandrayaan-2 mission used the GSLV Mark III for liftoff. ISRO is trying to make more successful launches using GSLV Mark III so that the vehicle earns the tag of trusted workhorse like that of the PSLV. Now looking at the features. The GSLV Mark III is a 3-stage vehicle. The 3 stages of GSLV Mark III are solid boosters, liquid motor and a cryogenic upper stage. The cryogenic upper stage is a indigenously designed model. And see this, GSLV Mark III can put a communication satellite of 4 tons into geosynchronous orbit or 10-ton satellite in low Earth orbit. Also remember that this GSLV can lift heavier payloads than PSLV. Some of the characteristic advantages are listed here in this snippet. Please go through it. In this discussion, we looked into what is a reusable vehicle, GSLV Mark III and its features, and what a human payload fraction is. With this, we will end this discussion and move on to the next segment. Now let us take up the prelims practice questions. First question. A list of countries are given. They have asked, of the above mentioned countries, which are the members of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The countries given are India, Azerbaijan, Pakistan, Afghanistan and Russia. As we saw in our discussion, at present the Shanghai Cooperation Organization comprises of 8 member states. They are China, India, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Pakistan, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. So with this we can conclude option A is the correct one. That is 1, 3 and 5. That is India, Pakistan and Russia. I have to add one more thing. Before Shanghai Cooperation Organization, there was an organization called Shanghai 5 Group. It was founded in 24th April 1996. The organization consisted of China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia and Tajikistan. Later, in 2002, Uzbekistan was added to the Shanghai 5 Group and it rechristened itself as Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Okay. Now moving on to the next question. 2 statements are given. We have to select the correct statement. First statement. Wholesale Price Index or WPI is compiled and released by the Labour Bureau in the Ministry of Labour. Second statement. Consumer Price Index Industrial Workers is released by the Office of Economic Advisor under the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. Actually both are incorrect. They are interchanged. Actually CPI Industrial Workers is compiled and released by the Labour Bureau in the Ministry of Labour, while Wholesale Price Index is released by the Office of Economic Advisor under the Department for the Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. So the correct answer is answer D, neither 1 nor 2. Now moving on to the third question. It is also a 2 statement question and they have asked us to find the correct statements. Now let us look at the first statement. Foreign direct investment under the automatic route does not require any approval from the Reserve Bank or Government of India for the investment. Now the second statement. Foreign direct investment in the telecom sector has also been allowed up to 100% under automatic route. We already saw in our discussion that the entry of foreign direct investment by non-residents into the country is generally regulated through 2 routes. One is the automatic route, next is the approval route. And this automatic route is aimed for those sectors and levels of investment that are less restricted. So under the automatic route, the foreign investor or the Indian company does not require any approval from the Reserve Bank or Government of India for the investment. And this makes the first statement to be correct. Coming to the second statement, we know that this statement is also right because that is the issue discussed in the news today. Since we saw, as per the new reforms, the foreign direct investment in the telecom sector has been allowed up to 100% under the automatic route. And this has been increased from the existing limit of 49%. So both 1 and 2 are correct. So the correct option is option C. Now moving on to the fourth question. See here, 3 private space companies are given and the respective founders are given. We have to match the space company and the respective founders. So first is Virgin Galactic and it is matched correctly. Virgin Galactic was founded by Richard Branson. Second is Blue Origin. It is also matched correctly. Blue Origin is founded by the founder of Amazon, who is Jeff Bezos. Third is, we all know, SpaceX is founded by Elon Musk. So the correct answer is option D, 1, 2 and 3. We know Falcon 9 is the launch vehicle for SpaceX. Likewise, Blue Origin, that is Jeff Bezos founded space company, also has a launch vehicle. It is named as New Shepard 3. Okay, New Shepard 3 is a vertical takeoff, vertical landing, crew-rated suborbital launch vehicle developed by Blue Origins. Okay, it is owned and led by Amazon founder and former CEO Jeff Bezos. Now moving to the last practice prelims question. Here 3 Indian private space startups are given and we have to match with their corresponding headquarters. That is where their headquarters is located. First pair is Agnikul Cosmos. It is given Agnikul Cosmos is located in Hyderabad, but actually Agnikul Cosmos is located in Chennai. Second is Dhruva Space. It is given like Dhruva Space is located in Chennai, but actually it is located in Hyderabad. The third pair is Bellatrix Aerospace. The pair is correct. Bellatrix Aerospace is in fact located in Bangalore. So the correct answer is option C, 3 only. Let us say a little bit about the 3 mentioned Indian private space startups. Okay, Agnikul Cosmos Private Limited is a Indian aerospace manufacturer based in National Center for Combustion Research and Development in IIT Madras, Chennai. Okay, it aims to develop and launch its own launch vehicle, namely Agniban, which is capable of placing 100 kilogram payload in a 700 kilometer orbit. Okay, it is expected to launch its first commercial flight in 2022. Now let us look at Bellatrix Aerospace. It is also a private aerospace manufacturer headquartered in Bangalore. It plans to launch its own rocket named Chetak in 2023. Chetak will be a 2-staged rocket. Okay, the engine in the Chetak rocket is Eon engine. The company plans to use liquid methane as fuel. Okay, these are some important points relating to Bellatrix Aerospace. Now moving on to Dhruva Space. From the question we know that Dhruva Space is headquartered in Hyderabad. It is also engaged in the development of small satellites in the commercial, government and academic markets. It is not involved in the development of launch vehicles, but in the development of small satellites in the commercial, government and academic markets. We have completed the practice prelims question discussion. The mains questions from today's discussion are displayed here. Please write the answers. Now we have come to the end of the discussion session. If you like this video, please like, comment and share with your friends. For more updates regarding civil service preparation, please subscribe to Shankar IAS Academy YouTube channel. Thank you.